Well, it's good to have you on. Loved what you wrote and spent some time talking about it yesterday. It's funny, I had written the night before something about the idea of trying to go get Ronald Acuna because Joel Sherman put out, kind of put this idea out a week or so ago. And my package was similar. Wasn't quite as in-depth as yours. I only had 3 of those guys, but I also had Bryce Miller. I also had Colt Emerson. And I might have also had Harry Ford. You added Las Montez and Brandon Garcia. So obviously that's 5 for 1. Why do you think it's worth it?
Look, whether the Braves would even consider this, who knows? But, they're stumbling. They're having a bad year. They lack offensive depth. They lack pitching depth. So, as Joel Sherman threw out there, it's a possibility. You never know. But look, we all know what Ronald Acuna Jr. can do, former MVP winner. He came back from the knee surgery, and he's been crushing it. So he looks healthy, looks great. And look, the Mariners have 9 top 100 prospects on MLB's list. So they have as top a heavy and as good a farm system as any team in the majors. So if any team could swing a deal for an Acuna, it would be the Mariners. So we'll throw it out there. We had some fun. I saw your piece, so we're kind of on the same page.
Have you gotten any indication from anybody inside the ropes in baseball that Atlanta would be willing to pair with any of their young core?
No, we don't know. The Braves are with Alex Anthopoulos, their GM. He's notoriously tight-lipped. And it would take a lot of guts for a team to move a franchise icon. We just don't see these kinds of trades. Juan Soto, a couple years ago, that was a little different situation. The Nationals were terrible. They were rebuilding. The Braves, they're bad this year, but they haven't missed the playoffs since 2017. So they don't really want to tear things completely apart, right? And with a second half surge, who knows, they could get back into it. So again, odds are slim. Again, we're having fun, but you never know. It's baseball. Let's see some NBA style action here, right?
Well, I love that. I think that's the fun part of the deadline. Yep. The only challenge is then people get disappointed when these things don't happen. But whatever, that's part of the fun for me is going through some of the names and what it would take. What is your process when you put together a package of 5 guys for Ronald Acuna or a group for Paul Skeens? How do you try to come up with the right value for those guys?
Yeah, it's impossible because there's not a lot of history. Soto is the best comparison, but he only had, 2+ years of team control. Plus, he was making a lot more money than Acuna because he was going through the arbitration process. So his salaries were going to start ramping up to $25 million, $30 million. Acuna, he signed through 2028 at only $17 million per year. So his value is not only on the field, but that his salary, for as good as he is relatively low. So there's not a lot of history there. But you look at what Soto, the Nationals got 5 players. James Wood was the top prospect in that deal, and he's proven to be that, one of the best players in baseball this year. The other 2 main guys were Mackenzie Gore and C.J. Abrams. They'd already reached the majors. They had been top prospects, had reached the majors, weren't really quite performing, but had a good pedigree. So you're getting 3 top-of-the-line players for Soto for 2+ years. So to me, Acuna is going to have to bring back more than that. So that's why you throw in a Colt Emerson. The Braves need a shortstop. You get a proven major leaguer in Bryce Miller, and then 2 other top prospects in Harry Ford and Montez. So that's how I kind of went about coming up with that.
In 23 days on August 1st, how many new Mariners will be on their 26-man roster?
Yeah, that's a great question. The easiest thing, they'll add a reliever, that no doubt about that. Maybe a reliever, maybe 2. Will they get a bat? Realistically, not a lot of hitters out there. The teams who we know are going to trade, right? The Pirates, the A's, these teams don't, the Nationals, they don't have a lot of players to trade. So to your point about being disappointed, there's a good chance that, not only Mariners fans, but fans across the sport end up being disappointed because right now there's 21, 22 teams realistically in the playoff race. So there's a chance this deadline does end up a dud, but I'll say 3 new players. We'll say a couple relievers and some kind of hitter.
And they'd have to. I mean, you have to at least a Ryan O'Hearn. There's got to be someone out there that the Mariners could add. Arizona's been the probably the conversation we've had the most, and they're still in it. So as of now, Mike Hazen says he's not selling. But as you're trying to figure out those, prospect hauls and who's worth what. How about Josh Naylor and Eugenio Suarez, 2 guys who only have 2 months left on their contracts?
Yeah, Arizona's the team that'll kind of make or break this deadline because they have so many players heading into free agency. You mentioned those 2. They got a couple pitchers and Zach Allen and Merrill Kelly. But yeah, boy, Suarez would look great, right? That's for sure. The trouble is the Yankees need a third baseman. They're just moving Jazz Chisholm back to second base. There's a couple other teams that could use a third baseman. So Suarez, if Arizona does look to trade him, he's going to be a very hot commodity with, he's on the All-Star team this year, having a great year. But, boy, I'd like to see him hitting cleanup behind Cal Raleigh, wouldn't you guys?
Yes. I'd like to see them trade for both those guys. Like, to me, I would rather give up more and say, screw it, let's go for it. Put Josh Naylor at first, put Suarez at third, and now you got like a legitimate kind of lineup that with this pitching staff could absolutely go challenge for a World Series in this American League. So why not go big? Go with both of those 2 guys.
Yeah, no, I agree. It makes sense because look, it's going to be a lot cheaper to acquire those 2 than a far-fetched idea to get Acuna. So you're not going to, get rid of your entire farm system in a blockbuster trade. You're going to give up a couple good pieces, but you're going to retain a lot of the depth. So I'm with you. That trading for both those guys makes perfect sense. And I'll throw this out there. As good as the Tigers have been this year, they're solid. They're very deep, but they're beatable. At least when Derek Struble doesn't pitch, they're beatable. So if there's ever a year to go all in, it's this year. There's not a powerhouse team in baseball. The Dodgers have their issues. Tigers don't have a number 2 starter in my book. Yankees are vulnerable. So, yeah, this year is the year to go all in.
How much have these second and third wild cards kind of devalued your farm system? Right? If this were 10, 15, 25 years ago where, there wasn't the bounty of wild cards and teams all in it.
Yep.
Were farm systems more valuable, these prospects more valuable in some ways than they are today?
It's a good question. I think in a way, yes, because the top salaries now just keep climbing and climbing. So the value of having good young players who aren't making relatively any money are so enormously valuable that front offices are reluctant to trade those guys. You don't want to do what the Mets did a few years ago when they traded Pete Crow Armstrong for 2 months of Javi Baez and they missed the playoffs. You make a trade like that, the prospect you give up turns into a star. It just crushes your organization. So that's why GMs, they're so conservative in baseball. I look at the NBA, like I mentioned, you see all this wheeling and dealing, and we wish we had that in baseball, but GMs just don't want to screw up, so that leads them to tend to want to keep all those prospects.
David Schoenfield, ESPN, joining us, and wearing a Shakey's Pizza T-shirt, I should mention.
Of course,
yes, because you started your career up here, right? Seattle Times?
Yeah, I'm from Seattle, so I think the last Shakey's closed, right, last year, so sad to say that was my childhood pizza joint in
right next to
Washington.
Blockbuster, right next to Blockbusters. Usually,
you bet,
the 2 were typically paired
It wasn't
together.
the greatest pizza, to be honest.
That's probably why they had to close. All the Blockbusters went out, and they didn't know what to do. There was no steady stream of video rentals, people coming in looking for pizza at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
We talked about a few other names on this show over the last few days. The Braves again with Matt Olson, and then the possibility of the Red Sox with Alex Bregman. You see any chance that either of those 2 guys get dealt?
Yeah, I think Bregman is a possibility. All the Red Sox, they've won 5 out of 6 or something to kind of get back in the race. Bregman came out and said he would be willing to, discuss an extension. He has an opt-out after this year. It's hard to know what the Red Sox are thinking. They have Marcelo Meyer, who's a top prospect. He's a shortstop, but they have Trevor Story. So he's a solution at third, long term, if they do want to trade Bregman. You don't usually see extensions in season. So I would say there's probably, 20-25% odds that they end up trading Bregman.
Well, and it's a crazy thing because I love Bregman. I think he's a great player, and I think that attitude and the way he plays, I think that he has value even beyond his value on the field. And the sense from Mariner fans is such the opposite. There is so much pent up frustration and resentment from his time in Houston and the scandal. Do you sense that anywhere else, or is that just a Seattle thing?
Houston, no, they're hated everywhere. You go to, the Yankees, a fan, of course, they lost to Houston several times in the playoffs. They hate the Astros, but I'm with you. Bregman, it's a cliche, but this guy's a winning player. He loves to play baseball. He has power, good defense, draws some walks. The age is a little concern, but he was crushing it with the Red Sox. His swing is tailor-made for Fenway, dead pull hitter. So I don't know if the numbers would translate to Seattle, but he's a winning player. Any team in baseball would love to have that guy.
Are you done on the trade thing, Salk? Can we turn our attention to a couple other things? When you were eating your thin Shakey's crust pizza, watching Ken Griffey Jr. back in the day do what he used to do in that Kingdome, is Cal Raleigh finally giving you those same kind of vibes here in Seattle?
Man, I was watching the game last night, and for some reason I kept it on here at midnight in the eighth inning to see him hit another one. And yeah, as a baseball, I grew up a Mariners fan, so I still, root for them. But just as a baseball fan, this is so exciting. We've seen it from Aaron Judge and Shohei Ohtani the last couple of years, and we expect it from those two guys. But Cal Raleigh, this is one of the most phenomenal seasons in MLB history. It's incredible what he's doing as a catcher. He's going to hit 50 plus, 60. I know he's on pace for 60. That just seems unfathomable, but it's just so fun to watch. We saw it with Griffey all those years, and we've seen Edgar Martinez at his best. When a hitter gets locked in like this, it's just so much fun to watch.
So how is it happening? I mean, we look through the guys that have gotten to this level. We know how Bonds and McGuire and Sosa all of a sudden started hitting a lot more home runs. Junior was always expected to hit those kinds of home runs as a phenom and the number one pick in the draft, et cetera. This is almost maybe a little more like Salvi Perez, who started to do it a little bit later in his career. How does it click all of a sudden at 27, 28, and you start being on pace for 60-plus home runs?
Yeah, I looked into all his metrics a couple of weeks ago, and you guys might know more about what he has, said publicly. I didn't find a whole lot of, changes in his swing or his approach. Nothing, he's hitting better from the right side, right? Well, that was always his weak side. He's crushing lefties this year. So maybe he made some tweaks from that side. I don't know. But the only thing I really noticed was when pitchers are making a mistake, middle of the zone, he is not missing it. I mean, anything in the middle of the plate is over the fence. His slugging percentage on those pitches was incredible. I'm like twice as high as last year. So he's just not missing anything. He just locked in. It's
funny. One of the guys that he mentions a lot is Justin Turner, who was here for just a couple months at the end of last year. And I've heard Cal mention him now a couple of times as a big influence on him and helped him kind of see the game differently. I am always struck, as much as I love the projection stuff and like what Dan Szymborski does, I think that stuff is awesome.
Yeah.
But there's no way to account for this guy met Justin Turner, got to work with him every day, and he taught him something that all of a sudden makes it click. Or he's a switch-hitting catcher who's had a million other things to do in his career, and he finally had time to focus on his right-handed swing.
Or a little mass in your barrel and a torpedo bat.
Well, that's the other one, too, the torpedo bat, sure.
Yes.
Yeah, and, catchers, you have to research this to know if it's true, but catchers tend to develop sometimes a little later as hitter. But yeah, the Justin Turner thing is interesting because he meant so much to the Dodgers for all those years. And he, 10, 11 years ago, he was kind of one of the first hitters who's like, I got to focus on my launch angle. He was a singles hitting infielder, and he became one of the better hitters in the game by focusing on his launch angle, swinging hard every time. Now, Turner's a good contact hitter, but swing hard with two strikes. Don't worry about just, quote unquote, putting the ball in play. A lot of fans don't like that style, but it's working for Cal Raleigh. And yeah, I'm not surprised to hear Turner was a big influence there.